A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. This is the continuation of this about 100-page read of a book that seems to me um, very much so in need to be heard or read by African Americans, whether it be Muslim, Christian, you know, anything in between, whether it be pious, conscious. I'm carrying on with chapter number 8. This book is titled, for those who are just kind of viewing it, it's called Breaking the Curse of Willie Lynch. This book is The Science of Slave Psychology. Set in its title, it says, a psychic examination of slavery's haunting effects on the conscious of black men and women. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Chapter number 8, Black Family Success During the Segregation Era. Let us review the history of early post-slavery and the surrounding conditions in comparison with the segregation era leading up to the time of desegregation. In between then and now, something more unusual occurred within the framework of the black family structure and community as a whole. In this section, our aim is to pinpoint legislation tied to Eurocentered social policies that have been used to support methods like Willie Lynch's mind control doctrine, aiding in the process of making slaves. In my studies, I ran across a very interesting writing about a unique town entirely populated and governed by black people. For this aspect of the subject matter, you will be asked to locate a book called Kinloch, and that is spelled Kinloch, Missouri's first black city, written and documented by John A. Wright Sr., which is part of the Black America series. This black, excuse me, Bismillah, this book was not picked as a reference point because it was my place of birth, but because of the unique social attitude of the state of Missouri, which happened to be the last state to set free their slaves. I have found Mr. John A. Wright's book to be one of profound proof through example captured on pages as the perfect point of reference for this section in Breaking the Curse of Willie Lynch. In review, we will discover the different shifts in the attitude of black America over the many different shifts in the social climate of this country. Since black unity is a social matter and the events produced by racism are social, we want to carefully observe the economic repercussions brought about by the era of integration and post-segregation. Notice how the multifaceted progressions and regressions of black people in North America. For the sole purpose of provoking thought, I will ask you, the reader, a couple of questions in order to allow you to construct your own personal foundation as a basis for breaking the curse of Willie Lynch and company. During the time in which we presently exist in America, did black people gain more power and control over their destiny during the era of integration than during the segregation era? Yes or no? Did black people gain more power and control over their destiny during the era of integration than during the segregation era? Yes or no? What are the moral and economic downfalls in the black communities in this country as a result of so-called desegregation based on the theoretical promise of social equality with white society. This is another question. What are the moral and economic downfalls in the black communities in this country as a result of so-called desegregation based on the theoretical promise of social equality with white society? How does the moral and economic condition of black men and women today compare to the community actions and black morale social climate during the era of segregation? That is the third question. Once more, once. How does the moral and economic condition of black men and women today compare to the community actions and black morale social climate during the era of segregation? From the time when the abolition of physical slavery is abolishment. Abolition of physical slavery took place up to this time of the civil rights movement. There seems to have been a backward shift in community consciousness in the mind state of black America. Before the social desegregation of black and white America, black people had taken up the responsibility of developing our own educational systems. Even though blacks were segregated, we did not put social equality in front of black life quality. Quality education meant that blacks in their own school systems would demand proper curriculum materials even though they were under the influence of white scholarship. The 3 R's, reading, writing, and arithmetic, were supplied to inquiring young minds in our community. Due to hundreds of years of anti-self social conditioning combined with modern Eurocentric influence, education reform among black youth requires a much deeper penetration of the psychological realm in order to pierce the veil of falsified social barriers forged by policy and education under the mask of social integration. What we need as a people is inner black social integration, which is the infusion of all of the different divisions, organizations, political and religious persuasions into one clear constructive conglomerate. This concept of organizing seemed to be very effective during the segregation era when black people had been totally shut out from white racist America. The leadership in the black community possessed some measure of personal power simply due to the harsh nature of the social circumstances. That time period provided no alternative to self-reliance. In contrast to the social incorporating of black into America's mainstream, the segregation era provided a certain amount of force necessary to stimulate and uproot much of the superficial divisions listed in the documented letter of Lynch, because the level of pain produced by the high level oppression during that era in history. The circumstances of those times forcing black people to work in a constructive manner in order to meet the basic requirements of everyday survival, overriding the implanted psychological divisions based on the training implemented by slave masters that used Willie Lynch's slave making sociology. By being freed physically and allowed to think and function away from the plantation, black men and women discovered several key loopholes in past slave social conditioning. One was that the divisions were not as important as survival of the collective. In early post-slavery, we were recognized, even according to Euro-Gentile standards, as being a separate and independent people. Secondly, blacks were in between a rock and a hard place because we were forced to choose to wrangle over old white imposed social standards or values such as size, age, shade, education, and wealth, contrary to the post-slavery era when the choice was life or death. Presently, we live in an era of social desegregation where the implementations of an alternative social and economic view was provided through legislation. These laws are now used to maintain white-dominated society by maintaining control over the modern slaves who had now become more mobile. Control in relation to black liberation refers to the ability to influence, guide, or persuade aside from the input of another people's view. The author John A. Wright Sr., in his document Kinloch, Kinloch, Missouri's first black city, captured a time in America's history that showed insurmountable economic growth and black interracial integration, with black progress before we became addicted to the falsely fabricated alternative, which today is called civil rights. This is a social code word that has historically proven to undermine any type of real, substantial black self-empowerment. True self-empowerment has always blossomed from a people's ability to come together, first with their own race and family, producing a culture, and exemplary was a civilization, and then share those ideas with the rest of humanity. During the segregation era, when black churches were collectively organized for the purpose of developing a school system, using the Bible as a liberating tool and as a device of creating our own moral educational standard, this was a very effective method because by using what we were given from the slave master for our own purpose, black people at that time were able to create an alternative that was very constructive in the arena of developing a system of education that catered specifically to our needs. Since the school system and the black churches at that time were connected, we were automatically in ownership of entire school districts. If you notice, dwindling black owned schools immediately after the implementation of government's desegregation policies. As a collective, blacks were subtly lured away from personal community development for the sake of some mere so-called social advancements that were supposed to come along with the package of integration. But only decades later did many black people come to realize that dropping the idea of black unity to become absorbed by the white unified and organized majority was a painful lesson. Thanks to the era of segregation, black people immediately began to make true human progress in the era of business development, farming, product development, manufacturing, and more importantly, a solid family structure, a type of value system which is the basis of society. Family, which is an institution that has been destroyed from the kidnapping of the free first African. Even then, the African retained an understanding of the importance of family values and a will to attempt to reorganize during the plantation era. But something changed dramatically for the first generation of Africans after breeding millions of new fresh fertile minds for the master. The entire generation of adults were murdered, leaving behind a race of orphans that were now subject to the teaching, norms, and values of their captors. And for over 3 complete centuries under the tutelage of illegitimate foster parents, only after the emancipation of physical bondage did black men and women have the opportunity to develop families outside of the influence of their former masters. To expound on the pressure of segregation as a device of stimulus for black people after slavery in the area of self-help action, aside for government programs, is the damage done by influential legislation that made it unlawful to incorporate prayer in the schoolroom. These policies uniquely were implemented during a time where black communities and their churches were gaining massive ground in school ownership. Then came a governmental assisted politically undermining curriculum. This is the input that played an important role in putting a stop to that part of black progress. Soon after came the integration of schools, which divided the black community into separate districts. These are the events that finally led to the thinning out and watering down of black communities all over the United States. Before the era of integration, black people in America had an overall better spiritual foundation than we do after desegregation policies had been approved. What happened? We did not give up God, church, or faith. So how all of a sudden the reoccurrence of the Willie Lynch mentality emerged up out of the minds of black people, causing us to sabotage our own families and communities? Only when we reconnected in the relationship with the people who had kidnapped, mistreated, murdered, divorced, and psychologically raped you did the principle in the Willie Lynch letter become effective in the life of black men and women. Well, black people, today we are not only in their house, but we realize that it is their house. Even though the Euro Gentile obtained his house through unfair schemes of actions and falsifications of deeds, it's impossible to rule your own life completely in what is defined as another man's house. Time to get into developing real estate, agribusiness, chemistry, and engineering. But make sure that you are taking action after redefining the value of which nation you are building for. Again, whose world are you building? That there's the completion of chapter number 8. The next one will be chapter number 9, redefining the new black reality. Thank you for your listening ear. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh.